Good afternoon there, listening audience, and welcome back to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here at UCY TV, where our motto is question authority, and that comes from none other than Benjamin Franklin himself. Now, usually we deal with psychology, we deal with current politics. Tonight I'm going to take a little detour and deal with one of my favorite movie topics, and that is Lord of the Rings. And you know, I love the series. I love J.R. Tolkien's writing. My kids are even bigger fans than me. I mean, they watch it over and over, like I guess kids back in the '60s watched Star Trek over and over again. But tonight we're going to have John D. Bartolo. Did I pronounce that right, John?
DiBartolo is fine, yes.
Okay. And I guess you're somewhat of an expert on J.R. Tolkien and his series, and we're going to go into all kinds of details, you know, archetypes and psychology, politics, the whole bit. Now, go ahead, before you start, why don't you give a plug to yourself and Middle Earth Network?
Right. Yes, well, thank you for that introduction, and I think all Tolkien aficionados or people who study Tolkien and talk Tolkien, when they hear the appellation of expert, they always kind of shrink at that description, because one can never quite be a complete expert on Tolkien, because there is such a wide legendarium, and the man's writings and his life are so vast, and so we're all aspiring to be Tolkien experts. So. But I appreciate that appellation. So my name is John DiBartolo, as you said, and I am one of the founders of the Middle Earth Network. Now, the Middle Earth Network, which anybody can visit at any time, it's middleearthnetwork.com. It is a collection. We are a collection of fans and scholars who came together, and we wanted to create a place where fans, artists, scholars could all gather together, and movie fans, people who are just maybe fans of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy, a place where we could gather in a social setting, but also in a setting where we can appreciate art together, and that whether that's the movies or music, and do it in a way where the scholar and the lay person and just the basic fan can come together without any kind of sort of pretense. Very often in the past, there's been like a separation between like the Tolkien scholars, quote unquote, and the fans of just like the movies. So we saw a real need for a place, a social place for people to gather and kind of have an interchange and a dialogue about all things Tolkien. And the Middle Earth Network created the central site, and then we created a social network which is called My Middle Earth, kind of, you know, riffing off MySpace, but calling it My Middle Earth, where anybody can go there and create a profile, kind of like Facebook, and actually create their own free blog. We let people create their own websites there on the network. So, for example, if you're a Tolkien fan and you want to write about maybe Tolkien's relationship with C.S. Lewis or something, you could go on My Middle Earth and create your own blog, and then that blog gets shared out across the network. So kind of like an activity stream like you would see on your own Facebook page when you go to your home page. So if somebody posts about something related to Tolkien on their own personal blog, you would see it come through the activity stream. So it's a very active and very rich community, and many of the Tolkien artists, very prominent Tolkien artists like Ted Naismith, have joined our quest, so to speak, and brought their websites over. And this has enabled the fans to engage famous artists themselves in a very direct way that kind of hasn't happened before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Middle Earth Network, and then we also have a 24/7 radio station. That's fantasyradio.me, where people can go and listen to fantasy soundtrack music and science fiction music. And then our main news site is called Legendarium, and that's legendarium.me. And of course, that's inspired by Tolkien's phrase or term legendarium that he used to describe the whole body of his work. Legendarium, he didn't invent the word. That's an older word that was used to describe the acts of the saints. But he kind of co-opted that word, and really, when we hear the word legendarium, most people associate it with Tolkien. So I guess that's the Middle Earth Network in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it. So I'm one of the founders of that, and that grew out of my lifelong interest in Tolkien, studying his works, not only his literature, but his letters, his life, the things that he studied himself. I found to be extremely interesting, and I felt when I was reading his letters and learning about his time, the time he lived in, World War I and World War II, I felt a great sense of loss in a short space of time from from 1900 to say 1950. After that, something was lost in our culture. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I think it has something to do with technology and entering the fray and changing the way we interact as a community.
Well, I could. Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I want to come back to technology later, because he had some very interesting commentary that seemed to put him ahead of the time. But then again,
yes,
he was a contemporary of people like Huxley and so forth, in which it seemed that era where Tolkien comes from, there's so much rich analysis of culture, and I mean, it was before the age of Cardassians and Honey Bobo and all that kind of stuff that dominates people's minds. I mean, you could watch even general fiction in movies in the 40s and 50s, and it was so much higher in quality than even than today. But what I want to get to before we kind of get into those areas is I've heard different theories. I've heard that Tolkien he just had a very vivid imagination and fantasy. I've also heard that he used to go into the library and go into like these ancient writings, and that his stories were actually a blend of alternative history and his own creation in a sense that it wasn't, he didn't see it as totally just, I'm making this up.
Right. I would absolutely agree with that summation. And very often, we talk about Tolkien after the fact. when Tolkien himself ever heard, people talking about his work and trying to sum it up, he was always very resistant to let himself be described in any one specific way, because I think he wasn't quite sure himself totally what he was doing. It just came out of him. It grew out of him. And you're exactly right when you say he was going and reading these old histories. Beowulf would probably be if you asked Tolkien himself, what's your favorite piece of work, he would probably say Beowulf had the most profound influence on him. So as I was saying before, when I was reading about Tolkien's life and the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and I felt a sense of loss just from a few decades ago, he was looking back. Tolkien was a medievalist, and so he was looking back into medieval times and the Dark Ages and seeing how much we had lost since then. So that's why he was drawing on all these different things, Beowulf, and all of these different medieval writings. And yes, the Lord of the Rings was really a conglomeration of all of those different influences. And it's funny that you should say that, because speaking again of the Middle Earth Network, we were one of the co-founders of the Mythgard Institute. And the Mythgard Institute is the only college, online or brick and mortar, for that matter, where you can go and actually get a degree in Tolkien studies. a master's degree in Tolkien studies, and you would study all the peripheral stuff that Tolkien was into, Anglo-Saxon, Beowulf, and things of that nature. So that's part of the Middle Earth Network's mission as well, is to kind of resurrect that sense of looking back and being enriched by the things that Tolkien himself studied. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I was curious. Someone told me, I don't know if they knew what they were talking about, but that each of the groups in Lord of the Rings, the different subspecies of humans, for instance, someone said something about I heard that the elves were supposed to represent the remnants of Atlantis. I've also heard they were supposed to represent like the Scandinavians. Is there any truth in either of those? Or
well, really, the Atlanteans would be represented by the Númenóreans, the Númenórean kings, which Aragorn himself was the last descendant from the kingly line, and that's why Aragorn is so central to the story. See, Númenor was an island similar to Atlantis, and when you read Tolkien's letters and he mentions Númenor, he always has it's always very often listed as Númenor/Atlantis, because he was directly drawing on the Atlantis myth. And Tolkien himself had a recurring dream, which he called his Atlantis complex. He had this recurring dream that he would be standing on a shore and a giant wave would form on the horizon and then cover everything, including himself. And it was a really a bad recurring nightmare that he used to have, and he called it his Atlantis complex. And it wasn't until he wrote the story of the fall of Númenor that it was kind of like a catharsis, and he no longer had that dream. So the Númenóreans are the Atlanteans, so to speak, and Númenor falls. Númenor sinks into the ocean, and the breaking of the world happens because the Númenóreans are deceived by Sauron when he was in physical form, and he changed the method of worship on Númenor. The Númenóreans worship the one true God, Ilúvatar, and he convinced the Númenóreans to break the ban of sailing to the Blessed Realm. They were not allowed to go, quote unquote, to the Blessed Realm, to heaven, right? So Sauron convinced them, almost like the Tower of Babel, right, to break that ban, build a tower, or sail to heaven and take over heaven. And so then Ilúvatar stops that, and he sinks Númenor into the ocean, and a faithful remnant, that's specifically what they're called, sail in ships, in 9 ships, and they reach the shores of Middle-earth, and they become the Rangers in Tolkien's mythology, and they have to hide and kind of battle Sauron through thousands of years of history until finally Aragorn is the last of the kingly line of the Númenóreans, and that's what what we read about in the Lord of the Rings is kind of the culmination of the War of the Ring, and they do win, obviously, and Aragorn is able to reestablish that kingly line and take the throne.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, if you look at some of the secret societies, and various stuff, they must love Tolkien, because the whole thing about ancient civilization, their bloodlines and stuff like that. But that's a totally different show there. I don't want to get into those.
Right.
We could go on forever. But
sure. But the elves would represent. See, all of the races, really. I mean, and Númenóreans are men. They do have some elvish blood in them, but the different races, quote unquote, of Tolkien's Legendarium represent aspects of humanity. The dwarves represent it's not just the dwarves. There's a lot of greed for gold and for jewels amongst the other races. But the dwarves would represent one aspect of humanity. The elves represent the part of us, which was very important to Tolkien. The elves represent trying to keep things the way they are, not letting natural change occur. I mean, the elves built Lothlorien and Rivendell based upon magic, right? That the rings that they were given by Sauron, right? So Lothlorien and Rivendell can only survive while the rings themselves they survive. So they're using unnatural magic even though it's beautiful, to keep their kingdoms alive. And that's why Galadriel and Elrond must fade into the west once the One Ring is destroyed, because once the One Ring is destroyed, all the other rings will fade, and they must fade into the west.
Mm-hmm.
So the Elvish kingdoms represent part of us that wants to build earthly kingdoms and have them last forever, which Tolkien would have seen as totally unnatural.
Mm-hmm. So when the elves sail off at the end, are they sailing off to heaven or a new...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're sailing to what Tolkien would call the Blessed Realm, Aman, the Blessed Realm, basically, if you wanted to, a one-for-one analysis, basically that would be the heaven, the dwelling place of the Valar, the angels, and Iluvatar.
Okay. I'm going to... it seems that he really deals really well with the archetypes. It doesn't seem like there's no middle ground in Lord of the Rings, except for maybe the battle that people have to do to choose right and wrong. But the villains are very clear-cut. It seems it's a really good use of archetypes to present a story of basically good triumphing over evil.
Right. Well, I would, people have said this because we're used to seeing the archetypal figures talked about the most, whether it be Aragorn or Frodo or Gandalf. But there actually is a lot of gray area in the Lord of the Rings, and it happens in places like the Shire, right? The Shire folk don't want any part of any of this. They kind of are happy to drink their beer and tend their gardens, and they don't want to get involved in wars. And it's not just the hobbits that are like that. We see that in many of the cultures in Middle Earth. They don't want to be bothered with the archetypal conflict. So I think that is kind of a surface level assumption that Tolkien only dealt in archetypes. There is a lot of gray area that is dealt with, as well as a lot of struggle, a lot of internal struggle, a lot of battling temptation, and we see characters flip back and forth between good and evil.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Sauron here, I just wanted to... It seems like you could draw an analogy, the whole eye of Sauron that's watching you. I just can't help think about nowadays with NSA and that sort of thing. I mean, they can look at you through your computer if they want to, your cell phone and stuff. Tolkien, I mean, he feared this kind of developing, didn't he? I mean, in our own realm, he feared that governments would get too much power and kind of go into this like Orwellian path.
Yeah, Tolkien and Lewis and many of the of his friends and contemporaries who kind of had the same belief system, they saw technology as a direct descendant of just pure magic. So they were very concerned. Well, Tolkien was very concerned about the evil wizards. Okay, now his use of wizards would be a completely different connotation than what we think of wizards. When we think of, say, wizards today, we think of like Harry Potter and magic wands and stuff like that. To him, the wizards were a class of incarnate angels, actually called the Istari, and they were sent to Middle Earth to help guide men on the right path and to motivate them. Some of the other Istari we see in the Lord of the Rings are, we see Gandalf, we see Radagast the Brown, we see Saruman the White, right? And the two blue wizards are mentioned that wandered off into the east, and nobody knows what happened to them. So speaking of technology, he saw modern technology as a direct descendant of magic, and he was very, very concerned about the wrong use of technology. And the machine, right? And he even said, and I've mentioned this before in other interviews, that he saw World War II as nobody won World War II except the machines. He said that specifically. He said, everybody's come out the poor, millions dead, and the only one that seems victorious are the machines. And he personifies them. He says, "I wonder what their next move will be." the machines themselves. Tolkien was extremely afraid of technology and machines, even to the point where there's a story about his first encounter with a tape recorder. One of the first times he encountered a reel-to-reel modern tape recorder, and before he spoke into it, he uttered the Lord's Prayer in ancient Gothic in case there was any maybe demons in the machine. This is the worldview he came from, and I find that just so interesting and so lively and so enchanting that he thought these things were real. He believed these things were real, evil entities, both good and evil. So yes, your idea that the eye can represent, the NSA, we're being watched constantly and managed. And Tolkien himself would mention, quote unquote, central planning, because whenever power is centralized, unfortunately, because of the state of man, he would see man as fallen from his Christian worldview. Anytime you centralize power to a great degree, it's going to be abused. There's just no two ways about it. So he was asked once. He said, about his philosophy, and he said, "Well, philosophically, I would probably be closest to an anarchist." And for him to say that in his time, I find that to be pretty interesting. But I would consider him, if he lived today, he would probably be part of what would be called the libertarian movement or the freedom movement. That we have to decentralize power as much as possible, and so yeah.
So again, this reminds me of that thing. Like, I mean, I've had some shows with some speakers. It's been really interesting, but. So essentially, his view of Atlantis was that maybe the technology was their undoing.
Technology and false worship, which could be are closely related. What are you placing value in? What are you using the technology for? That's the big question. Because if we're using technology to change nature, do we have the power to change nature? This is the essential philosophical and spiritual question. Do we have the right, and do we have the actual ability to change nature? And we've seen the results of our attempts to do so. Mm-hmm. And probably the most shocking of that in our time would be the splitting of the atom. Really not much good has come out of the splitting of the atom. So Numenor fell because they changed the natural order of worship and true philosophy, and Sauron instituted human sacrifice upon the altar, and then convinced the kings of Numenor to break the ban of the Valar and sail west and try to take over heaven, and that's when finally Iluvatar decides to sink Numenor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could connect that to the whole Noah thing and everything too.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. The whole Noah and the whole Noachian concept, which if anybody's ever studied any ancient cultures, pretty much all of the ancient cultures in some way have some sort of a flood myth where humans broke some sort of a ban, or they followed the wrong entities, and then a flood issued forth. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're definitely. I personally have no doubts that the Atlantean myth is grounded in truth, and could be a warning for our time. It's funny, even in the New Testament. Excuse me, in the New Testament, Jesus says, "In the last days, it will be as the days of Noah were." Mm-hmm. So, I think that. The whole Atlantean thing is very relevant to what's going on today in relation to the all-seeing eye, mm-hmm. as well as our dependence on technology and trying to change nature so forcefully. I mean, so forcefully. There can be a natural science. We don't have to have this forceful attempt to take over nature, change who we are as humans, the transhumanist movement, and trying to literally attach ourselves to machines.
Well, I mean, the thing is that I think most I don't want to down Christians, but most Christians just assume that everyone was just being really naughty when they read about Noah.
Right.
And if you look at these older texts that weren't included in the Bible but were still seen as relevant during the days of Jesus, I mean, Book of Jasher, Book of Enoch, they don't talk about magic. They actually, Jasher just comes right out and says humans started messing with species and switching species around. And Tolkien, of course, did not live long enough to see that use of technology, but that has a greater impact, I think, on humanity than the splitting of the atom. I mean, the stuff we talk about now is going to make Brave New World look like, I mean, you read Brave New World now, it's kind of like, well, yeah, amateurs. I mean, so if we're changing nature, relying on technology, you see everyone just kind of, my gosh, I mean, you see teenagers just sitting at a table when normally in the old days they were all making noise and teachers have to come by and say, hey, quiet down. Now they're quiet because they're just sitting there staring into their iPhones.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I believe it's a real problem that we've attached ourselves to technology so much and we've lost the ability to, from a young age, delve into the written word. And to me, that's the central reason why we are where we are today in terms of surface level entertainment and very shallow entertainment, is because that pretty much in the 50s and in the 60s we banished real intellectual exploration, thought, reading, and attention to critical thought. And the public, we could talk probably for 3 hours about the public education system and what they're doing to people. But you're right. Going back to Noah's Day and the ancient legends of not just the Hebrews, but other cultures, they all revolve around this unnatural tampering with the human species. And creations of monsters and mixing species, like you said, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jasher, and some of those other texts all mention that, and even it's even hinted at in Genesis 6 in the Old Testament about the giants, the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and then you think about the fact that who knows how many civilizations took place before that. What happened to them? I mean, I think we have.
Yeah, I think Tolkien would agree that our modern record of history, of ancient history, is probably completely screwed up and lost for the most part. It's only fragmentarily hinted at, and it's funny, Tolkien was very interested in fragmentary history because it set his mind a-spinning when he would find these little fragmentary things. I have a feeling that Tolkien thought that Grendel was real, and that Beowulf was a real character. He may not have admitted it so much in his writings, but I have a gut feeling that he probably thought that those beings and those creatures were real at some point in the distant past.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about what would happen today you look at something like, I don't know, a TV series like The Walking Dead. And if you think about what would happen once you got all the zombies gone and everything, and people had to, just a disaster of some sorts where a few people are alive. Of course, you don't have the infrastructure anymore to maintain the technology if you just have a few survivors. So therefore, everything's just passed down. And if it gets passed down, it turns from a record to more of a legend to then mythology, and then
sure.
I mean, it just goes from there. I mean, it's sort of lost, but it seems magic to people.
Right. Yeah.
It's just, I'm sure 2,000 years ago, someone reads in the Book of Jasher, that humans were mixing with they were changing the species. That must have been like magic. Nowadays, we could just say, okay, well, we do that in labs all over the place now. It's not
right, exactly, and that's the stuff we know about. The stuff that I'm not so concerned about the stuff that's being published, that's being allowed into the media. Growing a human ear on a mouse. I'm very concerned about what's happening underground. No doubt about it. I mean, it's just like military technology. We hear about airplanes and military weapons, 30 years after they were actually developed. So the transhumanist movement and the mixing of species, in my summation, has probably been going on full bore for the past 100 years behind the scenes, and we're just beginning to be allowed to see some of the fruits of that.
Oh yeah, and it's only going to be once you get people accustomed to it. Which sadly, it seems like in our today's society, you've got some people that are really hyper aware,
right?
But then we've got the masses who Orwell said, well, you kept them occupied with sports and entertainment and beer, and
sure.
That's what they'll do. And one wonders what the future is going to be when,
right?
As we get more technology and those masses are expendable.
Yeah. Well, I think the real big problem that you have today, and I've mentioned this before, is that because of the distractions, whether they be entertainment or just trying to put food on your family's table, whatever your day-to-day distraction is, a lot of people don't have time or the interest to consider what's really going on behind the scenes, and so they've forgotten, especially in the technological age, we've forgotten that, or chosen to forget that there must be a spiritual element to the world. Okay, so if there is no spiritual element, then none of the stuff that we're talking about really matters. I mean, does it really matter if we're trying to mix humans with what other species? Wouldn't that be advancing? Wouldn't that be progress? Wouldn't it be great if humans could see in the dark or see into the ultraviolet spectrum, or so and that's the scientific view. The scientific view, for the most part, utterly discards the spiritual possibilities or the spiritual ramifications of mixing species and fully being dependent on technology and not being concerned with the spirit of man. And we see the utter plague, and most recently, like with Robin Williams killing himself. People are spiritually being defeated, and they're giving up. And I attribute that to the total discarding of the spiritual element of man and the care for the spirit of man.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain shallowness you see when people don't have something that's beyond just the here and now. And
right.
I mean, you can see that in some cultures, like in Northern Europe, where there's very little spirituality, and yet, we're told, well, they have good distribution of resources and things like that, but at the same time, there's a high level of depression and alcohol and
sure.
somewhat of a nihilism that permeates much of the culture.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, and I think Tolkien was very attuned to that, and you could see that in his writings and his letters. He was very, very, very concerned. In his day, he's talking about the stuff in the 30s that he's concerned about. The people who are leading us aren't even very smart, and he was very, very concerned about. He called them whiskered men with bombs, whose intellect is absolutely decreasing day by day, and they have all this power. And they're building these societies which are built, on precepts of just making money and building bigger and more powerful kingdoms and becoming dragons. He would call it the dragon sickness. I think we are living right now in a world that is 95% consumed by what Tolkien would call the dragon sickness, which is hoarding. The day-to-day life of the American is how much, of course we want to survive, we want to put food on the table, but the ultimate goal is to build a hoard and then what? Retire on your hoard. And Tolkien would say that's absolutely the wrong goal of life. we're not supposed to be building hordes here because you're not taking your horde with you. So we have a real existential and spiritual problem as humans, and that's why you see this conflict in philosophy, and it plays out everywhere. It plays out in the political realm. It plays out in the public schools, and on top of that, we've kind of made it an unwritten rule that you can't have a public spiritual life. Everything has to be privatized. You can't talk about your faith in the public realm, right? Oh, your faith has to be private. You can't bring your faith into the public realm. So then you have to be a duplicitous, divided personality and turn yourself into a schizophrenic person if you want to enter the political realm.
Yeah, I heard.
Which is, I'm sorry, guys.
I was just going to say, I mean, it was ironic that, for better or for worse, I mean, anyway, Tony Blair. He waited until he was no longer prime minister to be baptized as a Catholic. Now, he kept it secret. He was a Catholic, but he waited till he was no longer in office to get officially baptized. And I think the only leader I've heard of in recent years, at least in Europe, who makes a big case for spirituality is actually Vladimir Putin.
Sure.
and the media, and this is before any of the controversies, with the world events and stuff was really underway. Right now, it seems like, oh my gosh, World War I's 100-year anniversary looks like history.
Sure.
Is a cycle, but the thing is that the media, the big media in the United States, were, they're like, oh yeah, well, he's just doing this for this reason or that. It was like no one actually thought, oh, maybe he's telling the truth. Right. I mean, there was skepticism.
And to me, my personal analysis of the situation is that people have forgotten or refuse to be bold anymore. There is a real lack of boldness and standing up for what you believe. There's nothing wrong. I mean, my goodness, there's nothing wrong with telling people what you believe. There's no reason to be ashamed. We're supposed to be an open culture of dialogue and debate and freedom and free speech. So what if you believe you're a Hinduist? So what if you're a Buddhist? We need to know that, especially if we're going to be electing people. We want to know what worldview you have. So it's very duplicitous and very deceptive, I think, when these political leaders hide their true faith for political gain, for political reasons. I have no problem telling people, I come from a Christian worldview. I am a Christian. So what? That's what I believe. If you've got a problem with that, that's your problem. It's not my problem. So, that's what annoys me most about modern culture is that people are so easily offended by what you believe, and so that's another just a whole topic, a whole problem that we have today. People need to be bold in what they believe, come out and say it, no matter what it is, and other people need to respect that. And that's why we have such a conflict with the East. What's going on, like with Islam, and they're bold about what they believe. They don't have any problem coming out and waging war with their beliefs. And in the West, we're kind of like, well, we just want to get the stock market up. We just want to be entertained. We don't care about telling you what our beliefs are. So that's a real problem.
Well, and then on top of that, I've done lots of shows on the idea that in a society that is just based on the soundbite and the way you deliver yourself, then the people that have high levels of either narcissism or psychopathy are going to become the leaders of the country.
Right.
I mean, there's no other way of looking at it. You know how to use the system. You know how to say the right things in front of a teleprompter.
Sure.
And people are surprised when you say, hey, according to such and such study, these particular U.S. presidents score really high on psychopathy. And they're like, well, we didn't have any presidents that sit in the basement of the White House cutting people's throats. Well, no, that's it's Hollywood. They look at Hollywood. Oh my God!
Right.
I mean, they don't realize that.
These psychopaths are
I guess, I've seen these things, top 10 psychopaths in fiction, and they'll have like Hannibal Lecter, or they'll have the guy in American Psycho, and I'll respond to that and say, oh, you're kind of forgetting James Bond here. I mean, of course that doesn't fit because, he has a nice suit on, and he's doing everything for the good of humanity.
Okay? And again,
right. There's many old sayings similar to what the Bible says. The devil comes as an angel of light. He's not going to, and Sauron too. Sauron comes in a comely form. He's not going to come looking like with giant ram's horns sticking out of his head painted red. He's going to come and he's going to come bearing gifts as well. And he's going to come and he's going to slowly whisper in your ear. He's going to slowly change and deceive you. That's the psychopathy you're talking about that people need to be attuned to. And it's this suppression of letting people just say what they believe in an open form that is crushing us as a society. And your faith and your worldview absolutely needs to be in the public sector. It needs to be in the public schools. It needs anything public. If we're going to privatize what we believe, excuse my phraseology here, we're totally screwed. If we're going to continue to privatize what we believe as individuals.
Oh, absolutely, because it creates a disjointed person. Almost like what they call an alter. I mean, you're having an alter personality. Hey, I'd like to get one thing. The one thing is, what was... I mean, you said the thing about the Tolkien today would probably be like in the libertarian movement. What was his... And you said the thing about the not-so-smart guys with bombs, but what... Did he have a worldview that was maybe a little darker than maybe like the Nightly News presents, that there were... I mean, Edward Bernays said it right out in his book Propaganda, that people's values and beliefs and so forth are shaped by a very, very small elite. And that's only gotten worse with TV and so forth.
Sure.
How did Tolkien feel about who really held the power in the world?
It's all over the internet.
Yeah, he believed that there was... of course, he comes from a Christian worldview, a very orthodox, biblical Christian worldview, and he there's a quote, and I'm not saying it verbatim because I don't have it in front of me, but he said that evil is now so many-headed. The Hydra of evil is now so many-headed in its incarnations that really all we can do now is just refuse to bow to those heads. So he would absolutely agree with the analysis that. There are a few, and how many that few is, we don't know. And there could be several different groups of few that are even vying against each other for power, that they're working behind the scenes with lots and lots of resources and money trying to shape things the way they want to shape them. So yes, I would agree with what you just said about the quote from the other person, that there definitely are forces working behind the scenes to shape men's thoughts, and that's why what I was saying about people need to speak out about what they believe to fend off the acceptance of whatever's being dictated to us via whatever media you want to say is dictating our worldview. Because that's what's happening. Our worldview is being dictated to us through the institutions that we are forced to enter into. I am forced as an American to pay for everybody's education. I don't want to do that. I don't want to pay for my neighbor's son's education. That's completely immoral, and it's not fair. Me personally, with my children, I homeschool because I want them to be able to be free thinkers and to have critical thought. And in the public school systems, they are completely erasing critical thinking and free thought. They're saying this is the way it is this is the way you're going to be, and consider this on the topic of public education. I would love to have a whole show just about public education, but consider this. The data shows that if you spend 10 years doing anything, any one thing, you become an expert in that area. Let's say you spent 10 years studying geology. You'd pretty much be an expert in geology after 10 years. Well, we send our children to 10 to 12 years of public education, and they come out knowing what? Knowing what? Barely anything. I mean, go ask the average 18-year-old in any American town, who started World War II, and you're going to get a blank stare. Something is wrong here. Something is gravely, gravely wrong with our institutions in the West, and I would say probably most of the world now. So what's going on in the public schools? What are they teaching them? Why are they coming out non-critical thinkers, non-builders, non-productive, and depressed and aimless? So I see that as a real big problem.
Oh, absolutely. I was listening to my wife. She's Swedish. She always listens to the Nobel Prize dinner thing when it comes on. It's a big gala in Stockholm. They're not the ones that gave Obama the Nobel. Okay, that was the Norwegians.
That's one of the most comical events in our time.
Yeah, it was. But
you can only either laugh or cry at that award.
It wasn't the Swedes. It was the Norwegians. They have that part of the Nobel thing, but the Swedes give the one for the what do you call it, chemistry and math. But they had one guy I thought was really interesting. They had it's pretty common, a winner of some science Nobel from Israel.
In your body.
I say it's pretty common. They get a lot of it.
Sure.
But the thing is, you can understand why Israel has so many Nobel Prize winners, because he said that education from day one in the home he grew up in was emphasized. That was number one. The community emphasized it. So it wasn't considered cool to I skipped class today, or I didn't read this, or I cheated here, because it's so enshrined. And kind of that, the thing is, I think we can learn something, because in America, the thing is, we in the public school system, I tell people in Europe about this, that when you're interviewing teachers, for instance, for jobs, they don't ask. Often, many schools around the United States, they don't ask. It's not if you're going to be a literature teacher, they're not going to ask you how much studying did you do. Did you ever have anything written or something like that published? That's not going to be their first question. Their first question is, "Hey, what sports can you coach?"
Sure.
That is the first question in many. I'd say it's probably most school districts in the United States, is what sports can you coach? And that's what's going to be important. And then you see that, music gets cut, debate, speech, the sports that don't generate the big, headlines on the sports page in the local newspaper, like gymnastics, it'll get cut. Never touch football or basketball or something.
That is part of the
our culture too. I mean, more people know who Honey Bobo is than would know who, I don't know, Ray Kurzweil is. And Ray Kurzweil is going to have a much bigger impact on their life in the future than Honey Bobo.
Often survive.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, we've reached a very, very, very critical state in our society in the West, and fortunately, on the happy side of this conversation, there is somewhat of an awakening through alternative media, alternative news, shows like yours, Alex Jones, and many, many others, and YouTube has been a great blessing, I think, for critical thought and analysis and exploration of alternative history. So I think a lot of people now are saying, hey, wait a second, what we were taught in public school is not exactly correct. And there's a lot more going on now than we had originally thought. So I hope that awakening continues.
Well, I personally think it will, because
Because your
more
body's
and
having
more
repairs
younger
and then
people
building up
don't
body
even
tissue
bother
and
picking up
therefore
newspapers anymore.
feel better.
I mean,
Right.
why bother? You can go on the
More
internet and
competitive
get your news.
by
If
going out or by
I mean, for
going
better or
away.
for worse,
But
when
the
they
thing
mentioned
is,
the thing
cycle
about
has
the
kind
journalist
of
that was killed
very, very,
by
low
ISIS,
level of guilt feeling.
the thing
Yeah,
was
they
that
don't feel
on one of the
it.
alternative news websites I
Or
go
they
to, they had the
feel
video
it's
already,
a
and
form
this
of
is just,
guilt. It
yeah, they
might
had
be
that stuff up before the headlines appeared
not
in
reaching a
the
goal.
main
Or
newspapers.
a
I mean,
disappointment that
that is
well, they
what
did something and now
is
they're
available
not
now. Although a lot of
or,
people
you know,
still
mad
that,
or
you know,
something
they get on the
because
internet,
they did.
they're more concerned with
But they don't feel
posting
guilt,
pictures
like,
of kitty
oh,
cats or what they had for
good,
breakfast on
or I
Facebook or
wish I
something.
had done that,
But
so
yeah,
that
I think you're
it's
right.
more of
The people that are
okay,
aware
well,
are becoming
that was the
hyper
wrong
aware.
choice to make.
Right.
The people that aren't aware, they're just they get more distractions and more
Sure.
blingy type stuff to stare.
Yeah, well, I think also too part of the problem of those who are not waking up to this is because it's kind of scary, you know. So it's kind of like what's that quote from the movie? Yeah, you don't want to know the truth. You can't handle the truth. I think that's a big part of this. Yeah, that's a big part of why people are turning to self-medication in various means, or because of depression and anxiety. They're just choosing to mask the symptoms of reality and choosing to ignore, staying in their shire and just tending their own garden and not at least waking up to what's going on. Hey, it's fine to tend your own garden, but at least try to at least explore a little bit of the truth of your reality of what's going on out there. And just people waking up to the potential of what's happening or what's about to happen is going to be a great victory for those of us who are concerned about truth and reality.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be more true amongst younger people. Just
definitely. Yeah.
I try. Yeah, there's a lot of older people that will not trust anything unless they see it on the nightly news. I mean,
yes. Unfortunately, they've already swallowed that pill. Yeah, and it's very hard to break the older generation out of that because they trusted their leaders and they came from a different generation where there was reason to trust their leaders, and especially the generation of World War II, World War I. And that generation is pretty much dying out now for the most part. So it is up to the younger generation. And throughout history, throughout ancient history, it was the young man, it was the young woman who really led the tribe. It was they were the ones that were supposed to be responsible. But we went through the past 100 years where the old people were leading. It's time for the young people to wake up and to pick up this generation and bring it where it needs to go.
Oh, absolutely, and I really do think that just like with the series Lord of the Rings, a lot of it looks really dire and horrible and dark, and then at the end, it turns out right because good people do the right thing.
Right.
And I just try to convince people that I deal a lot with. I mean, in any kind of media, you're going to deal with a lot of negative stuff, but
sure.
It's always been the people that were informed and courageous who were the survivors who then brought the culture out of whatever darkness it was in.
Yeah.
And I just think it's sad that a lot of people like, the world's terrible, so I'm not going to bring children into this world. Well, if you care about the world, you should be the one bringing children into the world.
Right. Yeah, it's an acceptance, and I would call that an acceptance of death over life. I am vehemently against abortion, not even based upon religious or faithful reasons, just based on philosophical reasons of you're impeding life. We need more life. We don't need any more death. Right? So, and who knows who has been lost in those multiple generations of little lives that have been snuffed out before they could become the next Einstein or the next Tolkien. So I'm all for life and forging forward and being bold and taking the challenges head on And that
And
goes back
they
to what I
get
was
in.
saying before. Is be bold about what you believe.
Very
Hey,
rare.
I don't care what you believe.
That
If you're
often
a
that people just
if you're a
say, "No,
pagan,
no,
be
thanks,
bold about it. You know,
forget it,
if
forget
you
it,
are
forget it. It's hard to do unless you're
just a
psychopathic.
philosopher,
If you're
be bold
psychopathic,
about it.
you're
You know,
totally not-
don't
you
shrink.
care what other people are doing
Don't
'cause
shrink
you're
from
looking
being
down on
bold
them as
in
being
whatever
more
faith you
than
have.
Yeah, there's
And you'll
certain
be much
arrogancy I'll
healthier
talk about in a few
mentally
minutes, psychopaths
for it.
have.
And hey,
That
maybe you'll
arrogancy
change your
often
philosophy or your
helps them
faith
say
if
no
if
to
you
the
continue to
temptation.
seek truth.
And
That
in
is
the
why
remaining just
most
couple minutes
of
we have
the
here,
people who are psychopathic of
I would
any
say that
age
the one
tend to be
message
in good physical condition.
that's really important, I think,
Because
of the
them,
Lord of the Rings,
they
is
are making a
that
statement
when
with their bodies.
when a
And
group
also they're
isolated
able to
itself,
say, "No, I don't
it
want
put
that."
itself in danger.
They go at it,
And it's not until they unified,
And
I mean,
that's something
again,
to
he's
learn.
trying to make a
I'm
point here.
not saying
The
you have to
elves
go out there and be
and the
amoral,
humans and
but I
the
do think
hobbits
that
and
guilt does
dwarfs,
hold us back, and
when they unite, they have
maybe-
power. And like I said, I've met
how you've
people
been raised and so
who
forth.
are really
Try
concerned
to
with
look at
the
that
state,
and
for
think,
instance,
is
you
it
say,
going to
of
help you
public education in the
feel
United
guilty
States.
about something? Maybe you should
I've
look at it
met
a little bit
people
more
who,
like,
they're
okay,
like
this is
lesbian
not
pagan
something I should
or
be
something.
Sure.
But she
Maybe I
wants her
shouldn't
children
be this
to have a
Maybe
good
I shouldn't
education, so she
sleep around.
homeschools.
Right.
And-
Yeah, the homeschooling movement. I mean, primarily
But you
originally
know
it
what?
started mostly
Most
in the
human beings
Christian
give in to the
community, but you
temptation.
have people of all faiths, all walks of life, pulling their people out of the public education system because they see it's actually just detrimental to the mind of the child. And for the past 6,000 years of human history, or however far back you want to go, based upon your view of history, the child was schooled at home. He learned his father or his mother's trade. There was community. He was allowed to run around free in the community without fear of the many of the fears that we have today about letting our children just walk down the street. So loss of community is another big problem we have today. So it was never meant for our species to send our children to be educated by complete strangers. I think that is totally unnatural and absolutely detrimental. Now, of course, you can have great schools. You can have great institutions. I'm not saying all public schools are bad or all colleges and public institutions are bad, but you really do need to put thought into it. You do need to know and be concerned about the needs of your specific child, and especially, what I would say, especially at the younger age, up until like age 8, 9, 10, up until 12, the home is the best place for the child to be educated. And you're never, ever going to have that opportunity for bonding again. Because if you send your child to public school starting at age 5, 6, man, they're bonding with other people besides you, because how much time do you have left to bond with them? Not much. Maybe dinner time, maybe the weekend. That's not enough time to make a spiritual bond with your child.
No, and you're not going to be able to pass on your particular culture to them.
Exactly.
Hey, speaking of passing on, I'm going to go here. We only got a few seconds. Excellent interview, and I'm going to contact you about a couple things in your email, and especially I want to have you back in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to come on and talk again. This was great. That was a quick hour.
Yeah,
I'd love to talk about a whole slew of topics. I'm very interested in ancient history, like you mentioned before, the Book of Enoch, and things like that outside of Tolkien as well. So I really appreciate you having me on, and I would invite people to contact me. I also have a music project that I work on called Lonely Mountain Band, and people could check that out. You could just Google Lonely Mountain Band or go to minstrelsongs.com. And feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to anybody.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you, and wish you a nice weekend, and really encourage all listeners, hey, check out his website, okay? Anyway, thank you, John, and we'll talk later.
Cheers and fair travel.
Okay, take care. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
For more news, visit pigminews.com.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to